And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us across the vast Louisiana plain, where we are elevating the cause of constitutional conservatism, asserting the voice of freedom throughout the state, and slowly but surely, day by day, draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom, brought to you by freedom-loving Louisiana First Patriots. Hello, State of Freedom warriors. Thank you for inviting us along for part of your day today. We are so grateful for you. You are the best listening family anyone could possibly hope for, and I can't say it enough. We are here only because of your encouragement, your prayers, and your financial support. If you're looking for a way to support us, advertise with us, or send us feedback, please visit our website at freedomstate.us. We'd also really appreciate it if you'd help us get the word out and spread the reach of the State of Freedom. Please like the show on whatever platform you listen to us, subscribe to it, and share it. You can even share short clips from our YouTube and Rumble channels, and the links to those platforms are in the show notes and over on freedomstate.us. Well, today we have joining us a friend of the show who you all cheered for and most likely voted for alongside of us. She's a fighter, a patriot, and she's just getting started. I can't wait to talk to our AG-elect, Liz Murrill. Before we talk to Liz, let me read the scripture of the day. It is Proverbs chapter 4, verses 8 through 9. And it says, "Wisdom will exalt you when you exalt her truth. She will lead you to honor and favor when you live your life by her insights. You will be adorned with beauty and grace, and wisdom's glory will wrap itself around you, making you victorious in the race." And as I was reflecting on that this morning, it occurred to me that wisdom is a gift from God that he gives when we seek him and when we love truth. And I believe the opposite of that is true as well, that those who are shunning God and who ignore and don't embrace truth, for those people, wisdom cannot be found. It's completely elusive. And this is how God keeps the ones who love him steps ahead of those who hate him and hate his ways. It's the gift of wisdom from God that we can see and recognize in those who love him, because we can see his favor in their lives, and we can see it guiding them and protecting them, and we can see how it makes them victorious, even when it may seem like a long shot, because they honor and love the Lord and truth.
Wisdom, Danielle, that's so well said. Wisdom is attendant to a developing relationship with God. So the more we deepen our relationship with the Lord and become friends with the Lord, our depth of wisdom increases. And boy, we pray every day that our leaders will have wisdom to enact policies and advocate principles that serve the people. And our guest today, Liz Murrill, I believe this is Liz's, if I'm not mistaken, third time on our show, but first time as Attorney General-elect of the state of Louisiana. What a great pleasure, Liz. Thank you for taking the time to join us for a little bit today. How are you?
Well, I'm great, and it's great to be with y'all. Thank you for having me.
You're always welcome. So tell us, how are you feeling about your win? We're so thrilled for you. How are you feeling really about the outcomes of the elections overall for our state?
Well, I think the outcomes were great for the whole state. We're going to be moving into a whole new kind of phase. You can feel the hopefulness and the excitement when you go around the state. And I think that's really, really positive. There's a lot of positive energy around change that we need to make. And, I know that we've had several years where some good bills have been vetoed in the area, just say, of election integrity. And crime, I know that we're going to have some initial work to do when we come out of the gate in January, but I think you're going to see some real positive moves and we're going to capture some ground that we've been fighting for the last several years.
I'm so excited, and everyone we talk to is so excited as well. I think it's just, you can kind of see the new day dawning that we've been hoping for. And I hope, but I'm sure that people's plates are getting filled up with ideas of what they want to tackle.
Well, and you just look at some of the bills that were vetoed on election in the area of elections. I think you can see that there's some things that will move quickly that I think most people embrace as good ideas. I mean, we want to have safe and secure elections that people trust. And some of the legislation that's been vetoed in the last 3 years just really, I think, was very discouraging.
It was discouraging. And you look at
voter rolls, some dead people.
Voter rolls
Exactly
is one, and supplemental annual canvass. What in the world is wrong with a supplemental annual canvass of registered voters in Louisiana to make sure that that only the people who should be on the voter rolls are on there? It seems like a common sense piece of legislation, Liz, and that's one of the ones I'm sure that you're alluding to that was vetoed.
Right.
Yep. How's your transition going?
Mine is going great. I have a less traumatic transition than, say, the governor does, the governor-elect. Just the governor has a much broader job and a lot of agency secretary jobs to fill and a lot of other important appointments to make. I have some people here in our office that I think will transition over to the governor's office. Some of those folks are in the process of deciding what they're going to do, but we've had a great team here over the last 8 years. And of course, I want to put my own mark on the office. And so I'm looking at bringing some people in, but most of the work that I will do is going to occur after inauguration, not before. But I have made some key appointments, including one that I'm announcing this week of my new Solicitor General.
Amazing. Well, we'll be watching that for sure.
And is it premature to make that announcement today, now?
Well, I probably will be making it today, but I'm happy to tell you who he is. His name is Ben Aguinaga, and he, among other things that he's done, he clerked for Justice Alito. He worked at the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division, and he's currently a lawyer with Jones Day in Dallas, and he's going to move to Louisiana and take over and help me take our operation to the next level. We already work a lot with other states and on the national side of things, where especially where it involves federal overreach or constitutional violations by the federal government, like in our big tech case. But I am really looking forward to building a new team and a big team of gladiators for the state.
Gladiators. I like that word.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we need some powerhouses to take on all that's coming at us.
Well, you're one, Liz.
Yeah,
you are
exactly.
a gladiator.
Obviously,
and I'm not even
she's
going to
the
call
gladiator
you
in chief.
Yeah, I'm not even going to call you a gladiatrix. You're a gladiator.
Liz, what's your first order of business as AG after you get your office set up? You have so much to take on probably issues that range, as wide as the Mississippi or as long as the Mississippi even.
Well, crime continues to be at the top of my list and everybody's list. I think we really want to make some initial aggressive moves to kind of send a message that there is accountability when you commit crimes in our state. And I think that, the last decade or less, I think probably especially in the last 5 to 7, 8 years, the message has not been that there's accountability. And I think that has driven our rates of crime up. And so I'm prepared to step in and do whatever needs to be done. I have already announced a working agreement with Jason Williams in New Orleans and with the governor to take over when the governor sends state police down into the city of New Orleans. And I expect Governor-elect Landry, as soon as he becomes Governor Landry, to immediately start moving more state police down there so there are more boots on the ground. And Jason has agreed to recuse those cases where there are arrests made by state police, to recuse those cases to my office. And so I'm working now on what the details of that arrangement will be, what kind of staffing I need for that arrangement, and how to make it successful for both him and for me, because we want to send the message in New Orleans that there is accountability and make sure that the criminals kind of can go find another place to commit crimes outside the state of Louisiana, because we don't want them here.
Yeah. Amen. We have heard that people are concerned about, in immediate terms, the Super Bowl. and New Orleans' ability to host it as a safe city. So it's very encouraging to hear that plans are in place already to start mobilizing.
Well, and I would just point out that the Super Bowl is a year away. We have time to kind of mobilize some of those plans, but we've also got 4 back-to-back Superdome concerts with Taylor Swift coming in May. And so there will be a lot of people coming into the city, not just for the Super Bowl, but for events that are planned prior to that. And, the time is now. We are not going to wait to put these things in motion. And I think that they will have an immediate effect of kind of tempering some of the opportunistic crime that we've seen playing out on the street. And then we're going to have to work on, I think, some of the deeper levels of criminal activity that are more organized around, because, we're going to have a lot of, I think, cockroaches scuttle back into the shadows. We got to root them out of the shadows, too.
Absolutely. And you got a situation here where, because of the agreement with DA Jason Williams, you're not going to be in a situation where you're waiting on a case by cases for a DA to make individualized decisions about whether or not they're going to send those cases on to you. You already have basically sort of an in globo agreement in place that certain categories of crimes will automatically be recused and sent on to the AG's office. Are we understanding that correctly, Liz?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. I mean, it's going to be certain categories. And I would like to work with the DAs. I've talked with some of them about this. I will have an advisory council of DAs that will be a standing advisory board for my office so that I can work very closely with the DAs as time goes by. I see us as partners. My role is different from theirs. They have primary original jurisdiction to prosecute cases, and I want to be their partner in that. I handle their recusals, but I'd like to also have us work on getting through some of the backlogs of cases that we're experiencing after COVID. And I think that is a problem that exists outside just the boundaries of New Orleans.
Yeah, and streamlining the recusal process itself and having an agreement in place sort of perimeterally is going to certainly help expedite that process. So it's very, very good to hear. Let me switch gears for a second here and talk about the COVID shot, our old friend, the experimental COVID shot. I don't think there's any secret at this point, Liz, that shot has caused a lot of damage, a lot of harm to a lot of people, not only across Louisiana, but across the state. A lot of people feel like they were not properly informed about the efficacy of it or even the potential harm of it. Well, recently, it looks like Texas AG Ken Paxton is now suing Pfizer for misrepresenting the effectiveness of the COVID shot and making some very, very ambitious claims about the efficacy of the shot. And this lawsuit is seeking not only money against Pfizer, but also it looks like an injunction limiting what Pfizer can say about the efficacy of the vaccine. What are your thoughts on that AG lawsuit over in Texas? And is there any consideration or exploration of possibly taking similar action here in Louisiana against the big manufacturers?
Yeah, I've been monitoring that suit very closely. As you know, my son is one of the people who was hurt by the Pfizer vaccine. He developed myocarditis right after, within less than 24 hours of having the second dose. He started having chest pains and was in the hospital for over a week. Very serious condition, very expensive hospital bills. I think that the more I dug into it, the more concerned I became about not only the narrative that was being pushed out by the federal government, but also the narrative being pressed by the state that was entirely inaccurate. And I wrote a letter to the governor and to the secretary of the Department of Health at the time and Dr. Cantor to express my concern that they were engaging in what I considered to be intentional, malpractice, criminal misinformation that could have very serious, if not lethal, consequences for some young adults that might be going out into sports camps or practices or things like that. And sometimes it affects people who aren't really doing anything other than going about their daily business.
That's
My son
true.
was going to be a counselor at a camp. He wasn't, going to football practice. He was just, cleaning up and helping get ready for a new bunch of kids coming into camp. It was hot outside, but, that was the extent of what he was really being exposed to. And he developed heart pain, and, his troponin levels spiked very heavily within the next 36 hours. And we had very little information to go on because the government was suppressing it, and so was Pfizer. So, and Moderna. So, I have very grave concerns about what was happening. I think that the broad immunity that was granted to Pfizer and by the state that we granted broad immunity at the state level too. I would like to see all of that rolled back. The lawsuit I'm looking at, they filed a state lawsuit, and I would be interested in filing a state lawsuit here. I'm kind of looking at what some of the other states are doing, and I'm waiting until I'm actually in office before I act.
Was your decision, Liz, to recommend the vaccine for your son, I'm assuming based on what you just said, that decision was based upon information that you were receiving from sources that at least ostensibly we thought were reliable, our federal health authorities, the manufacturers of the vaccines, and that they were effective and that the risk of harm was minimal. I wanted to ask you whether so your recommendation or advice to your son to get the vaccine was based on that, and possibly also on the fact that you simply for that reason were not aware of the risks at that time.
No, that's exactly right. There was no information. My son was actually the very first case in Louisiana that was identified as myocarditis that was definitely triggered by the vaccine. On the day that he called me, I found the very first article that was popping up in the New York Times, I believe, or the Wall Street Journal, based on a study in Israel about myocarditis and the risk being elevated for young adult men. And, that's part of what caused me to insist that he be tested, and then insist that he be tested again 24 hours later. But, yes, we had no information that was actually available to us. And I believe that Pfizer did have information that was available to it, or that they were deliberately manipulating the studies they were doing so that they wouldn't have information that was available. And then they were making dramatic claims that it would have no impact, they would have no side effects that were permanent or harmful, and that it was effective both in blocking transmission and contracting the vaccine. So, contracting the virus. So we found out many of those things were not true. And look, I think we have to be fair, I think, in terms of recognizing that there was a lot that was unknown in the early stages. I don't think any of that uses intentionally misleading people for the purpose of preventing vaccine hesitancy. And that's what we've seen. That's what has borne out in our big tech case.
Yeah.
Is that the government was deliberately manipulating information to withhold speech and actual true information.
No doubt about it.
To manipulate the vaccine uptake and make sure that they weren't allowing anybody to do anything that would affect vaccine hesitancy or increase vaccine hesitancy. And it's just, in my opinion, wrong.
It is wrong.
That you would withhold information. Our entire medical complex is built on informed consent.
Yeah. And Liz, I have to
deliberately manipulating our informed consent.
You're so right. And I don't know if you know this, but I worked for Pfizer up until this year. I left in early April to start the State of Freedom with Chris. And when I was there, I'm not privy to any information that would, help in a case or anything like that. I don't know of any deliberate misleading by anyone, but the tenor of the internal communications within Pfizer completely changed. So I worked for Pfizer for 6 years, and we always the mantra was not everything is for everyone. Every person is different. Every body is different. Every situation is different. And there's no medicine that is a one size fit all for every single person. And so when the narrative shifted from you talk to your doctor and your medical situation is specific and personal to you, do what's best for you, to this is what everyone must do, including inside of the firm, inside of the company. It was the same. This everyone must do. We had mandates as well. And it just started feeling really, really icky, for lack of a better way of saying it. It seemed very greedy, and it seemed very off tone from the company that I had known and worked for basically, at that point, probably 3-4 years.
Well, we saw that a lot with the federal government too. And I think that it fed a lot of distrust by people. There's a certain number of people who always distrust government. There are people who develop a distrust based on things not feeling or sounding right. And a lot of those people are thoughtful people who are doing their own research or doing the best job they could at their own research. And, I think that we saw a lot of shifting of narratives. And, when it became clear that the vaccine could not basically stop transmission, government needed to be honest with people. It did not. I will tell you, I am not one of those people that thinks that it had no value at all. I think it did. And for older people, my parents are in their 80s, I think it was a good thing for them to be vaccinated. And it did reduce hospitalizations. And, to some degree, to a large degree, this was an experimental process in the sense that we had a situation that we'd never had before. We had a vaccine that was developed in a very, very, very short time through experimental approvals through the FDA. And all of a sudden, the entirety of the power of government turned itself on the American people and started doing exactly what they said wasn't going to happen. And it started threatening people.
Absolutely.
You have to do this or you're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your pension. You are a bad person. You are a threat to society. I mean, the narrative shifted so hard and so fast. It's terrifying.
That's right. And not only was the narrative shifting, the capacity to really research and find contrary information that may have undermined the narrative was being suppressed through collusion between the federal government and big tech. And that's what I wanted to ask you about next, Liz. You were obviously at the spearhead of the lawsuit with Louisiana and Missouri against the federal government, against big tech, colluding to suppress our speech and to suppress information related to the adverse effects of this vaccine. And the Fifth Circuit ruled favorably. What is the posture of that lawsuit at this point?
So we're currently waiting for a date for oral argument at the United States Supreme Court in that case on our preliminary injunction. That injunction blocked the government from suppressing protected speech. It blocked the government from coercing or enticing these big tech companies to, on behalf of the government, suppress protected speech. And, there is a large amount of speech that a lot of people may not agree with that is protected speech under the First Amendment. And, the First Amendment has always protected minority opinions. And I think in the area of COVID, a lot of our opinions about the government's actions and the government's vaccination program and whether there were side effects, even the election, that was another area where people had very differing opinions about not just this most recent election, presidential election, but the one prior to that. And we saw suppression of speech in the area of election speech too. So, I think that what we've seen is a very, very quick, again, harnessing of the power of the federal government to violate people's constitutional rights. And, what originally may have been some grounds for legitimate engagement quickly became grounds for a means of suppressing people's protected speech and a weaponization of the government to do that, using these big tech platforms who started out opposing the interference of the federal government, but under some threats to their Section 230 immunity eventually became compliant partners.
That's right. And as you said a couple of shows ago, several months ago, you said that the coercion preceded the collusion. First, there was coercion and then the threats by the federal government against the big tech. And then that led to the collusion, which led to the suppression of our speech. Speaking of holding big tech accountable, there was some legislation a couple of years ago, some good legislation by Senator Jay Morris right here in the state of Louisiana that would have empowered the Attorney General in Louisiana and also individual citizens to sue big tech for flagrant violations of their First Amendment free speech rights on social media. I know this has interplay with Section 230, but my question is: would you entertain legislation on the state level that would allow citizens in your office to sue big tech in certain cases when they violate core fundamental freedoms like the First Amendment on social media?
Well, remember, Chris, the First Amendment, it protects us from state action, governmental action. So, there is no violation of the First Amendment in the absence of governmental action. And so if a private company establishes boundaries for and parameters for speech on its platform, that is different from the government coming in and directing that platform on what the parameters of permissible speech have to be on their platform. So, I think we do need to, I'm pretty close to an absolutist when it comes to the First Amendment. I don't think that the government can come in and tell a private company to do that. Now, there are, when they are effectively conduit for speech and the only conduit for speech, that makes them more like a newspaper or a radio station. And I think that we have to look at whether these tech platforms are still, platforms or not. That's where you cross over into that Section 230 immunity problem, where they have had immunity because they don't police speech. They say, we're a platform, we don't do that. And now there are concerns that have arisen about the platforms being way too open and allowing sort of flagrant anti-Semitism or flagrant racism, overt racism, or terrorism to flourish under the openness of these platforms. These are real problems.
Liz, let me respond very, very briefly to that, because the 230 immunity allows big tech to be free from civil liability or civil lawsuits for what is posted on their platforms, as long as they are remaining platforms and not becoming publishers that are making decisions about what can be posted and what can't be posted on their platforms. So it seems to me that their 230 immunity should be called into question if they are no longer platforms where the free exchange of ideas and thoughts can be on display, and they're becoming publishers and making decisions arbitrarily about what can be expressed on their platforms.
Well, I think that's right. They have implementing a bunch of, restrictions on speech. They effectively become publishers, and I think they do threaten their own Section 230 immunity at this point. And that is a huge question that I think is pending right now at the United States Supreme Court. So you are going to see there are a number of cases right now that are pending that are going to be discussing the boundaries of state action, the boundaries of Section 230, and when do you cross over, and these are big questions, I think, that have surfaced in the last decade when these platforms have become such ubiquitous means for us to communicate with one another and to express ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's what probably happened years ago when television and radio first came of age, and now all of a sudden you had a whole different outlet for people to communicate with one another. And newspapers have long been subject to some restrictions. I think radio is and is regulated by the FTC. But government's ability to regulate it is something that starts to get us into the First Amendment. And I think that these are important questions. And what I've seen lately is way too much of a movement away from protecting speech, even if it's disfavored speech, and a movement toward regulating, both questioning the value of the First Amendment and freedom of speech as a core value of our country and our Constitution, and trying to move people in the direction of embracing the idea that disinformation or misinformation, defined by whom, I would ask you, and I think the answer to that is typically the government.
Yes.
That has become the new mantra, that you have to be protected by, the government has to protect you from all this misinformation that you might receive. And that term, or disinformation, that term became used. It was used an awful lot during COVID. It was used a lot during the election about misinformation or disinformation about the elections. And I just think we have to get back to a place where we trust the American people more, and we educate people about where they can, go. And government always has the ability to speak. We're not talking about limiting the government from speaking. We are talking about limiting the government from coercing and threatening other people for their speech and using private companies to do their bidding.
Yes, indeed. And I don't remember which U.S. Supreme Court justice said it, but he said the core foundational wisdom of the First Amendment is that the First Amendment exists not to protect the speech that we like. It exists to protect the speech that we disagree with and even may find vile. That is why the First Amendment exists. And I think that your whole philosophy, as you fought this case and as you move forward and the opinions you've expressed, is based upon your understanding of why the First Amendment exists. And it exists, again, to protect the speech that may be in the minority, that most people may find objectionable or disagree with. But that is why the First Amendment is so important.
Well, and let's go back to the founders and what kind of battle they fought and write our foundational documents, right? They were challenging a tyrannical government that controlled what people could say and do. And that's part of what they were fighting, right? Was this control that the government had over them. And freedom of speech was so foundational to that original, separation from England. And it always has been, I think, a foundational core value to maintain democracy in America. You have to be able to criticize government without fear of retaliation and reprisal from the government.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's what the First Amendment protects. And, we are actually the government, the state government, through the attorney generals in the big tech case, who are attempting to vindicate that core value against the federal government. And I think that's really important too, that the attorney generals have the ability to go out and protect our people and their foundational right to freedom of speech when it has been attacked by something as large and powerful of an enterprise as the federal government.
Yeah. And Liz, as we're looking forward to January and your inauguration and beyond, thinking about the legislative session, are Are you planning to be active during the legislative session? And are there any particular issues you'll be following or teaming up with legislators on?
Well, crime and redistricting are going to be the first order of business. I think, I'm not sure which one of those will come first. It might be redistricting. And we're in active litigation over redistricting, and I expect that to continue. I will be involved because my job is always going to be to defend the map that is drawn by the legislature in the redistricting area. On crime, I do expect to be taking an active role. I will be working with the DAs and with the sheriffs to make sure that we bring back a sense of safety and real safety in our communities. And I'll be doing whatever I can to play my part in making sure that that happens.
Yeah.
And then we'll roll into the regular session. And I think that we're going to see more of some of these bills that were vetoed in the past in the regular session. I certainly would like to encourage and support some of this legislation to make sure that people, as we are rolling into 2024 and Super Tuesday and a new presidential year of elections, I want to make sure that I do my part in encouraging legislation that makes people have confidence in our elections.
Yes, because there are many across the state who do not currently have great confidence in our elections for any number of reasons. Do you see, Liz, yourself at this point taking a proactive stance when it comes to the any potential vaccine mandates maybe coming down the line in the future, or any lockdowns coming down in the future, or do you wait and see what the federal government may attempt? Because many people believe that it's not just a matter of if, it's really a matter of when federal authorities, perhaps acting in collusion with international authorities, may try to lower the boom on state citizens again with regard to federal international health decrees. I'm assuming you're on guard, vigilant, alert, awake, and sober, anticipating that sort of thing. Do you? I cannot imagine that you are not on guard for that.
No, I mean, I'm on guard for that, and I know a lot of my colleagues are on guard for that too. And certainly, the interplay between international influence over our domestic policy is something that I'll be watching very closely. At the state level, I think that the incoming governor, Jeff, is not going to entertain lockdowns or things like that. We very actively oppose those. But I think that there's some cleaning up we need to do to our legislation that makes the legislature a more active player and gives the people a more active mechanism to block some of these mandates when they disagree with what the governor's doing. What we saw, I'm not worried about the incoming governor. I'm worried about the people who may follow after that. And I think that, when the people started to express their concerns, they weren't heard. And the courts really did not step in and do their job either. And I think that what going through that process did was revealed some weaknesses in our system that we need to address. So if this happens again, the people have the ability to take back their government.
Yeah, and a clarification of rights legislatively, I think, is of paramount importance, no question. I think the opportunity to do that is now. I want to ask you, Liz, about the something on a consumer protection issue. We're obviously the Attorney General's office has what's called a consumer protection division within your office, and I can't tell you the number of people that we've heard from, even some members in our group who have reached out to us regarding having been aggrieved, screwed over, for lack of a better word, by companies and so forth that they purchase goods from. A lot of times it has to do with vehicles that they've bought that they feel like they've been completely misrepresented on by car dealers. oftentimes they don't have the resources to go and file lawsuit and address it judicially. What role does the Consumer Protection Division of the AG have in trying to provide some relief to these citizens who feel like their rights have been violated, or they feel like they've been defrauded by some of these merchants and providers in the state?
Well, we do play a role in consumer protection. I think, one of the things that I'll do in transition and as we move into kind of the first few months while I'm in office is take a look at how we are communicating the role that we play to the public, so they'll know both what we can do for them and what the limits are of what we can do for them. We're not in a position where we can provide individual representation to everyone who believes that they have a consumer dispute. We do address unfair trade practices and things like that. And, we address other consumer trade practice problems, so it really kind of depends on what the problem is, the level at which people are experiencing, what is the conduct at issue. And I think that we need to have probably some communication of that and make sure that we're doing a good job at outreach to the community about what resources we have available to them and where they can get other resources if not to us.
Yeah. And because I think it's important, because there are a lot of people who don't really understand what the role of the Attorney General is in that situation. And there are circumstances where real relief, I think, could be provided within the jurisdictional scope of the Attorney General's office, and would be, efficient both in terms of time and cost for Louisiana citizens in those situations. So I'm glad to hear that is on your radar screen.
Well, I would love to be able to help every single person. I hate to see when someone feels like they've been taken advantage of. Our office is, our resources are limited by the legislature and the budget that we are given. So, within the context of what our limits are in terms of staffing and legislative authority, we're going to do everything that we can.
Yeah.
And Liz, you mentioned off air that you are going after FEMA on a certain program. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what the suit is, what the status is, and what it could mean for Louisiana citizens?
So I have a lawsuit pending right now with 43 parishes and 8 states, counting Louisiana, and 2 municipalities challenging the rates that have been created under Risk 2.0. And we had a live hearing with Judge Daryl Papillon in the Eastern District in New Orleans, and we're waiting on him to rule on the various aspects of the program and whether FEMA can continue to implement some of the rate restructuring that it put in place. One of the things that I and our congressional delegation have been fighting FEMA over is the lack of transparency on how they came up with these rates. They have withheld information that would actually allow us to know how and why the rates were created and what inputs they used and the algorithm they used to, produce these rates that they're imposing on people, which in some case has the effect of kicking people out of their homes. It's throwing people into bankruptcy. It's throwing people into, just a homelessness because they can't afford their mortgages anymore. And, that has a lot of downstream consequences. The program was created to provide a mechanism for people to obtain affordable insurance, flood insurance, that they could not get on the private market. And unfortunately, FEMA has attempted to basically equal the cost of this program with the private market, which is entirely contrary to what the statute authorized them and directed them to do.
Yeah, and of course, I mentioned to you as well that I would love to see you sue FEMA over the maps entirely, because that's an issue that's facing, I think, kind of behind the rates thing in a way. And it's something that we're experiencing for sure in Terrebonne, and I'm sure in many other parishes across the state and probably across the country.
The maps do have consequences. Right now, I think your actual rates are other than being thrown into the eligibility for the program by the map that is created. The biggest problem is that the rates that they've created aren't actually tethered to your risk under the map. The rates can be very high, even where you have low actual risk, and they have tethered the rates to predictions about the future rather than actual information about your actual flooding in the past.
Wow.
And that too is a problem, and that is a huge shift in how the entirety of this program has been implemented during its whole existence. So that's something that we're challenging.
We know the government has a pretty horrible track record of predicting the future accurately. So
That's right.
I'm not willing to trust them on that one. Well, Liz, you, in my view, are part of a dream team administration. Is there any issue in particular you've got your eye on tackling that under other circumstances with another crop of people may not have been possible before now?
I think right now my eye is on the immediate crises that we face in front of us, which I think is crime. And I always am going to be somewhat focused on continuing to build our team, our federalism team, so that we have a really, really vigorous team here at this office that is focused on protecting our state sovereignty. I think that's something that's always been given less attention by attorney generals prior to this most recent one under Jeff. And I think it just needs to always be one of the most important core values of this office, that we protect our state against the assault of the federal government, so that we can continue to make the decisions that are right for us out of the building, across the lake from mine, where the legislature sits. And that's where policy should be made for our state, and at the local level as well, not in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, so very important. So very important. On the crime issue, Liz, to close out here, I want to ask you this. We had a guest on the show recently, and I appreciate what you said a little while ago, the fact that the Super Bowl is not going to be for another year, but we have big concerts coming in May, which is just right around the corner. But he said, the recent guest said that he had real concerns as of right now about whether or not New Orleans is safe enough and has the infrastructure in place. He used the example of the Super Bowl, but I guess you could use the example of any other large attraction, any other large concert or whatever there. But he doesn't believe right now that New Orleans is safe enough to host those very, very large events. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we made it through Mardi Gras last year, but we made it through Mardi Gras with the influx of additional law enforcement. What we need to have in New Orleans are boots on the ground in a consistent, meaningful way that changes the way, people behave. And, bringing them in for one event can make that event safe. I think people need to exercise precautions when they're out on the streets in New Orleans, no matter what. But I do believe that we can, provide a safe environment for people on a one-off basis. That's not going to make our city safer. We need to make that city safer for us to go there on a regular basis, and for the people who live there, and we need to be able to bring that city back and get it off the top 10 most dangerous cities in the country. But we have 2 other cities in Louisiana that are on that list too.
Yeah.
And we need to get them off that list as well. So there does need to be some fundamental changes toward the approach to criminals, and make sure that there is accountability. And I think that we've got to start working downward from there, but that's a good starting point.
Yeah, and the AG's office active involvement in many of these cases that it will be inheriting from the DA's offices, as you mentioned earlier, is going to be a big, big step in making sure that there is the kind of accountability that you're talking about. But Liz, I don't know why, but whenever we have you on the show, it always seems like it goes by fast. But when you're on, it feels like 45 or 50 minutes. It feels like about 5 minutes, because it's always so fun, always so engaging and informative. I just wanted to tell you how much we appreciate you taking some time to be with us today. And we are so gratified about the outcome of your race. Have no doubt you're going to do an outstanding job. And we just look forward to supporting you and helping you in any way that we can.
Well, thank you very much. I always enjoy being with y'all and having, good substantive conversations about the challenges that we face in our state.
Thank you, Liz. We'll talk to you soon.
God bless you. Have a great day.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Chris, she is such a delight, and she is, so consistent on the substance, so consistent on her stance with the Constitution. I think specifically with freedom of speech, but with any number of issues, Liz is right there with the Constitution. She went back, reminded us of where the founding started around freedom of speech. And I think she's so right when she talks about this dubious distinction that Louisiana has because of 3 crime-ridden cities that make it into the top 10 list. Under her leadership, under the leadership of Jeff Landry and this new legislature, along with, I think, the citizens who are quite active and motivated now, we're going to see ourselves get off of that top 10 list of worst places to be and most dangerous cities and get onto some good lists like we've been saying.
Yeah, she definitely knows where the vulnerable points are. She knows where the areas are that need to be worked on in the state, and I think is ready to move forward substantively. One of the things that I noticed about Liz is that if we did not know any better, and we didn't know that she had actually won the election, we wouldn't be able to tell one way or the other that she had won the election by her answers, because she is saying the exact same things after winning this election that she said before, and even more confidently and even more directly. So I believe that she is 100% determined to take these steps to make sure that our state is safer, to make sure that our fundamental individual freedoms are codified, that state sovereignty is asserted. And I just think that we could not ask for a better attorney general, both in terms of her ability to reach out and engage with other leaders, but also in terms of her political and constitutional philosophy. That's the thing that refreshes me and gives me so much hope.
Yeah, I was also really encouraged to hear her relate to a number of times having confidence in the elections being an important aspect of what she's going to be focused on going into a big federal election year, a presidential election year. Obviously, election integrity is something that is bedrock to the state of freedom. It's bedrock to LeCag, and it's something that our listeners care very deeply about. So to know that she has our back on election integrity issues and sees a lot of the issues that we have been talking about is very, very encouraging.
So happy to hear her. I agree with you completely. So happy to hear her talk about election integrity and the importance of making sure that our elections are ones that the citizens can rely on and count on and depend on. And I wasn't even previously aware that was one of her top issues really until today, because we spent so much time talking about other issues. But wow, that is impressive and very, very encouraging to hear. Yeah. I want to tell you, Danielle, as always, how pleased and happy I am to have spent another almost hour with you on the state of freedom. I want to thank our many, many listeners and supporters across the state and encourage continued donations, continued subscriptions, and continued support of the state of freedom, because we are expanding rapidly and really revolutionizing the way political advocacy is done in Louisiana.
Yes, thanks, Chris. And if listeners would like to support the state of freedom, they can do so by going over to freedomstate.us online, or if you want to send a check, you can do that to P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana, Bourg, Louisiana 70343, and the same for LeCag. We have a lot to look forward to next year in terms of some federal elections. We're having people run for Congress again and Senate, and obviously the presidency. So people can support LeCag at lecag.org. And also, Chris, the P.O. Box.
The P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70896 enables us to continue building our resources to elevate the voice of constitutional conservatism and to help not only good candidates who represent our values get elected, but also to hold legislators accountable for how they vote and how they act in the legislature, to be your eyes and ears in the state legislature. It is such a vital role, and your support of LeCag will help us to continue being your eyes and your ears.
Yes, LeCag has a lot of ground to cover in the year ahead and the years ahead, so we will be able to do that with your support. And I would be remiss if I missed the opportunity to mention that we have a precious metals investors club that you may be interested in learning a little bit more about. For if you are interested in investing in precious metals, or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry, Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you are just interested in purchasing metals, you can visit metalstacks.com/dwalker. That helps me out. I get the commission, and you can refer people to Metal Stacks as well for an additional income. So if that's something you're interested in, learning about the business aspect of it, you can email me directly at Danielle@freedomstate.us.
Katie and I are about to get involved in Metal Stacks. It's such a great opportunity, and we cannot wait to do so. Well, Danielle, we have come so far. I believe today, by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be a day or two from now. However, our 100th podcast has now been posted. Thrilled to death. I cannot wait to get to 200, 300, 400 as we storm the state and expand across the state of Louisiana. And every day, through courage and grace and decisive action, take another grand step to preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. I'm right there with you, Chris. Thank you. God bless you. Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.